Hi, it's Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show. I'm your host, and for nearly 2 decades now, I've been an executive coach and leadership development consultant. And on this show, I share evidence-based insights from my coaching, leadership, and psychological expertise, and inspiring interviews that help women like you to combine your work, life, and motherhood in a more successful and sustainable way. Join me and my special guests as we delve into leadership and lifestyle topics for women, empowering you to thrive one conversation at a time. I'm so happy that you're here, and let's get on with today's episode. Welcome to this episode. I'm your host, Nikki Lowe, and today we're talking about male allyship, about what men must do to dismantle the patriarchy. Because at the current rate of progress, it will take over 130 years to close the global gender gap. And that's a statistic from the World Economic Forum in 2023. Just let that sink in. 130 years. That means our daughters and even their daughters could still be fighting the same battles we are today. And yet, when we talk about gender equity, the focus always seems to be on what the women need to do. Lean in, speak up, break the glass ceiling. But what about the men? Well, today's guest is here to help answer that question. I'm joined by Jeremy Stockdale. Jeremy and I met at a Women in Leadership conference last year where we were both keynote speakers. And normally I'm pretty cynical about men telling us what we need to do for gender equity. But Jeremy was different. Not only was he a genuinely lovely person with a passion for inclusive leadership, but he delivered powerful insights into what men should be doing, not women. Jeremy is the CEO of Why Lead, a leadership consultancy he founded to bring a more data-driven and human-led approach to leadership development. And with 2 decades of experience leading large, diverse teams across the UK and Africa in the banking industry, he has seen firsthand both the challenges and the opportunities when it comes to gender advocacy and inclusive leadership. He now works with organisations worldwide, helping leaders lead with purpose, curiosity and passion. And he's a regular speaker and consultant on gender equity, allyship and leadership that truly makes a difference. And in today's episode, we're diving into smashing the patriarchy, the role men must play in gender equity, and what real male allyship looks like. If you've ever wondered what practical, tangible actions men should be taking to create change, then this conversation is for you. I won't keep you any longer. Let's welcome Jeremy. So welcome, Jeremy. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Nikki. I'm thrilled to be on it.
No, it's great because we met a few months ago now, the back end of last year, wasn't it? I think it was October last year at a conference where we were both speaking, and I sat in the audience listening and watching your presentation or keynote and was just blown away by it. And I was like, I've got to get you on the podcast. I've got to get you on the podcast. And not only are you a fantastic speaker, but the subject and your take on it. So I can't wait to dive into this conversation today.
Well, thank you. Me too. I remember us talking before we both spoke, and we connected massively on the power of leadership, didn't we? So I thought, yeah, we're going to be mates.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into this then. So for people that don't know who you are and the work that you do, can you take us on a little bit of a journey of like how you've come to do this work?
Yes. So I'm now in my second career. So I run a company called Why Lead, which I created or formed during the pandemic, which was, ideal timing, I think, for that kind of creative time. And I've now been trading since 2021. So it's my 5th year. And Why Lead is about, it does what it says on the tin. It's about why lead? Why should leaders lead? What's your purpose as a leader? Why should people follow you? And what got me to that was that I spent my first career working for a big bank, 27 years, which I know is not particularly imaginative, but I had quite a variety of things in that time. And the last 15 years, I had the privilege of leading a number of large teams across the UK and Africa. And after the first 2.5 years of not being particularly good at it and stumbling along and learning as I went, I suddenly started to find it incredibly rewarding as I had a positive impact. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So I kind of found my purpose as a leader by accident, and I just saw it as a huge privilege, and I love the responsibility. So what I want to do now, what I'm doing now, is encouraging other leaders to find their sense of purpose and to lead with compassion and humanity and vulnerability, because that has a better impact on the people they lead. So that's a little bit about me.
Love that. And I remember when we spoke, you talked very openly about becoming an accidental leader, and actually how, as you said then, that for the first couple of years you were really finding your feet. And I really appreciated that level of honesty, because most people have that experience. We find ourselves in these leadership positions going, oh my God, I don't even know what good leadership is, or if I do, what's my flavor of it, and how do I be authentic and do all the things that's needed. And I really appreciated you kind of going, it took me a couple of years to find my feet with it, and I made mistakes along the way.
It was really tough. It was probably, certainly at that point, it was the toughest part of my career. Those first 18 months were really tough. And after the 3-month honeymoon period, where I just thought, I'm just loving all of this, I suddenly realized I didn't know how to do things. But the worst thing was my team knew that. So it was tough for me, but it was actually tougher for them, being led by someone that didn't really know how to lead. I was lucky. There were good leaders around me as my peers. I had a boss that was patient enough to give me time. And I just stumbled across the things that kind of got me to a point of moderate competence. And once I found that, I thought, I just want to be better and better. But I saw a stat recently, in fact, I shared it with someone I was working with, that 82% of people are accidental managers. In other words, you get given a bunch of people with no formal training. And actually, some people thought it's higher than that. 82% underestimates it. But we set people up to fail. You would not ask people to do something highly technical without giving them technical training. But we expect people to lead other people just because they got technical skills in a particular field. It's madness, but we still follow that approach.
Yeah. And in there, I think what I heard in your story and what comes across every time I speak to you is this common thread that even though you weren't clear on what you were doing and made mistakes, you still deeply cared about the impact you were having on people, and you cared enough to kind of really be resilient to discovering how to do this well.
Yeah, I think that was the case, because I remember there was definitely a moment where I'd come from a head office role where I had a small team. They're all around me, knew what they did, they knew what I did, and it worked fine. And there was someone else who joined the kind of role I was doing. I was an area director, basically. So I went from having a small team in a head office to having about 180 people across, I think it was about 20 sites. And there was someone else who did a similar kind of shift to me. And I remember that they left it. They kind of said, just no, this is too much. It's not working. And they went back. And I remember thinking I could do the same. And I just didn't want to leave without having at least got to a reasonable level of competence. But it did take resilience. But it also, the important thing was, it's the support I got. I did get support. I was lucky that I could see people doing things well and think, well, maybe I could do some of that. Of course, I've seen a lot of people doing things badly and thought, well, I can now avoid that. And I think having a leader myself who I think was very frustrated with me, but didn't want me to fail, and therefore with some combination of tough love and some practical things I could do, it got me beyond that first difficult 18 months. But I don't think everyone's that lucky. And I think the worst thing about it is I do think there are some people that go through their entire careers never really getting it. And it's not great for them, but it's their people that suffer.
Yeah. And I imagine hard work and care in there. But that led you, as you said, you then went kind of internationally with your leadership and kind of managed teams in different cultures. So you've got like this huge amount of experience that you're bringing to this conversation. And I think that's really important. And obviously, we're here today to talk about male allyship in leadership as well.
Mm.
Can you share a little bit about what led you on that part of the journey? Because obviously that's how I came to meet you, and people may have come across you. And I know you've got your famous slogan as well. But would you mind sharing a bit about that?
Here it is, T-shirts on for the occasion. Yeah. So on Wednesdays we do Smash the Patriarchy, and I'll tell you about where that came about. My own The truth is, when I left Barclays I left in 2019, set up Wiley in 2020. I genuinely thought that I was one of the good guys. I thought I understood some of the challenges that women faced. I had a good gender balance in my team. I sponsored and mentored women. I got involved in female talent programs. And I really thought I'd done everything I could. And then something happened in 2021 that made me realize I hadn't done nearly enough because I just didn't know enough. And it was when Sarah Everard was abducted, raped, and murdered by a police officer, which naturally caused a huge outcry when you've got someone who's doing everything they can to keep themselves safe, following all the tips that you shouldn't have to follow as a woman to keep yourself safe, but then still wasn't safe at the hands of the very people that are there to protect you. I was shocked, and I was struck by just the reaction of women around the UK and around the world. And I spoke to quite a few, one of which was someone who I said, well, I want to help. I want to do things, but what can I do to be a better male ally? And she said, read 2 books. And the 2 books were Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates and Invisible Women by Caroline Credo Perez. And I read them and they blew my mind because I just realized that, I knew sexism existed. I've no doubt been sexist myself. And I knew there were definitely things that were designed by men for men. I had no idea of the scale, though. I had no idea of the scale of the things that women and girls have to go through every day just to go about their daily lives, the things they have to put up with, the things they have to do to keep themselves safe. And then the data biases were mind-blowing. One of the things in Caroline's book is that women are 47% more likely to suffer a serious injury in a road traffic accident than a man, because all the safety features in cars today are still designed around the male body. How can that be? And so what that did for me, it made me kind of curious to know more. I realized that at the age of 51, I just didn't really know how the world worked. So I read many more books, and since I've spoken to hundreds of women and men, and I now know a bit more. I'll never actually, I will never have the female experience. I'll never have that. But I now sleep less stupid. That's all I'll say. And so what I try to do is share what I've learned with others and encourage others to go on a similar kind of journey. Because I'm a reasonable example of that. It's never too old. You're never too old to learn something new. I was half a century flying blind. And like I say, now I just know a little bit more about it. And I'm curious to find out more.
Love that. And I'm also curious about what was it about you that went, what can I do to help? Because I think that's such a powerful question, but not everybody asks that, because obviously so many people were shocked about the Sarah Everard situation. But what was it for you that led you to want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem?
That's such a good question, because I don't think I've ever been asked that, Nikki. And so I think it's a combination of things. I think there was definitely the fact that I had been involved in things, and I don't like unfairness and injustice. My core value is definitely fairness. So I kind of thought that it's just not fair. I was really struck by how the women at the vigil, who I think courageously came together to talk about this and say this isn't acceptable, and then the way they were treated by the police, the way they were treated in the media, I was really shocked by that. Part of it is when I know it's not the only reason, but I've got a daughter. She's now 22. I've often been thoughtful about the experiences that she will have compared to my son, but also vice versa. So I think it's a real combination of things, and probably the fact that I thought I was a good guy. So I wanted to, I'd come from that point where, I wasn't a complete misogynist, and therefore, yeah. And I think also maybe it helps the fact that I, of a certain age now, you get to a point, I'm 55 now, but when in my 50s, I really thought I can give stuff now. I've learned a lot. I've been quite lucky to have had those privileges and opportunities, so I can give stuff. So I just thought it's something that I could. It also comes back to the fact that when I talk about leadership, I say leadership is a privilege, and it comes with responsibility. It's the old Spider-Man quote. But I also feel that I have a lot of privilege, and so the more privilege you have, the greater responsibility to do something positive with that. So it's a real combination of things. But it's a great question, because I haven't been asked that before.
And you really hear that come through in the responsibility that you've personally taken and now the responsibility that you're taking out into the world to say, actually, what can we do? And it's almost what I was imagining was you were struck by the gap of like almost your blind spots of, oh, I thought I was one of the good ones. And you absolutely are, Jeremy. That's not to take away from that, but actually the unconscious bias that we all live and kind of breathe, depending on where we sit in the world. So really being hit by that, it felt like it had such a strong impact on you. So you've now become a really positive male ally. And I just wanted to say, for those that are listening audio and not on the video, you kind of are wearing a T-shirt, aren't you? Can you share a little bit about that phrase and what that means?
Yeah, so I started writing some posts on LinkedIn nearly 2 years ago now, under the heading "On Wednesdays We Smash the Patriarchy." And the reason I started writing those is because my daughter has got a T-shirt, the exact same one I'm wearing, that says "On Wednesdays We Smash the Patriarchy." We've often talked about it. I've often thought it's quite cool, and especially when she's wandering around Bristol Uni, it does lead to conversations. And I persuaded her to let me just write a little post about it. I've asked her, why do you wear the T-shirt? What do you think of the patriarchy? Why Wednesdays? And it got a good reaction. It got a nice reaction. So the following week, I thought, well, I'm going to build on that a bit. I'll write about how the patriarchy impacts women based on what I've read and what I've been learning. And then the following week, I wrote about, well, it impacts men too. So how does it show up and impact men's lives? And I think based on the reaction I got, it wasn't intended to be a thing, but it then became a thing. And I just, after about 6 months of writing them, I thought, well, I'll just write them for a year. And now we're coming up to nearly 2 years, and I'm never short of things to write, just, especially now. But sometimes a post almost writes itself. I'll have something in mind that I might want to talk about, and then I'll see something in the news, like quite recently when Allyship, not for the first time, was body shamed, when she was training for the London Marathon. And I thought, okay, well, that's this week's post. So yeah, that's what I do, and it has got a following. But the best thing about it for me, or the thing that I've really gained from it, is how much I learn from what I write, but really from reading responses from people. Sometimes people just agree and add additional comments. They provide different insights. People disagree, sometimes quite vehemently, but you learn from that. So it's all helping to expand my knowledge. And hopefully what it's also doing is encouraging more people to come into these conversations, including men.
Yes. And for people that don't follow you on LinkedIn, I would absolutely encourage them to. I'll put your links into the show notes. But, you are using your platform in such a positive way. But also I wanted to say quite brave, because I love your curiosity, but there's a level of kind of courage that's needed to lean into those conversations, particularly as a man. And I know that when we met at the conference, you shared some brilliant insights and kind of statistics around men and actually how we show up as a male ally, but also how we might show up unintentionally and be part of the problem. Would you mind sharing a bit about that, about actually what is male allyship and almost what's the flip of that? Like, how might men be showing up often unintentionally in ways that are part of the problem?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, I'm not a massive fan. And this is something when I first started thinking about my involvement in this, because after I read those first books, I then went through a lot of education. And it was only when I thought I'd learned enough that I started. So about 2 years later, when I first spoke about things, it was for International Women's Day. A company asked me to talk about male allyship, and that's what I started doing. The term male allyship isn't one I particularly like. I think allyship has certain connotations of, you're an ally to someone, it means you have an enemy. It's okay if the common enemy is the patriarchy, but if you're a male ally to women, it might imply you're against men. That's not the case, but it can be seen that way. It also has slightly militaristic connotations, which I don't think are particularly helpful. So I don't mind the term allyship too much. I don't mind the verb. It's the noun I don't like. I don't like the idea that I am a male ally and men can think of themselves as male allies. It just feels a bit, it's making it centering us too much, and it shouldn't be about that. So, but with that caveat to one side, I think that the more men can realize how this will benefit them, the better it is. The more likely it is we can get more engaged. The fact is that the systems we are operating in, the social constructs, they're damaging for all of us in different ways. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is how can you get people to come into these spaces without feeling they're going to be judged or they're going to be attacked. And I think with me, there's potentially a certain amount of naivety in the way I go about doing things. Like, it's just slightly how I'm wired. But also, I think I have the benefit of age. You get to a certain stage in life where you just don't care as much what people think. But I've also done the work. I mean, genuinely, I've done the work, and I'm still learning things all the time. And so, actually, I quite welcome the backlash that comes. But that's easy for me to say. If we're going to get others dipping their toes in the water, we can't batter them the first time they do that. And that's still what I see happening quite a bit. Men asking questions, oh, what about this? And then it's like, just get piled on. And what happens is then they just retreat, maybe go over to the dark side. So we have to create spaces where men can explore these things, talk about these things. And frankly, men and women together, that's the other thing.
And I think, to add to your point, I think you come at it with so much humility as well. And I think that makes such a difference. And so you've said a couple of times around, actually, the patriarchy doesn't benefit men either. For people that might not understand that, what is it you mean by that? Both kind of, if there's a woman listening going, hang on a second, it disadvantages me, not my male partner or brother or whatever it might be. But also if there was a man listening as well going, I don't know what you mean. Could you share a bit more about that?
There are so many ways. I mean, the first thing to understand, the term patriarchy actually means rule of the father. You look at the definition, and it's an environment where men have most of the power and women are largely excluded from it. So as a pure definition, that doesn't necessarily work. I think you can still say men do still have most of the power, but most men don't have power. That's the thing. So when you look at senior leadership governments, you might be able to see that there are still predominantly men in those environments with the power and the influence. Most men don't benefit from that. So I think that's one of the important things to understand. There are many, many ways that it impacts women, which I could talk about till the cows come home because I've learned this stuff. But it impacts men in a multitude of ways as well. So just some simple ones is that for men, it's not really acceptable for us to show the full range of emotions that we might be feeling. In fact, from the age of 6, I saw some research. From the age of 6, boys have been conditioned to be it's only socially acceptable to show one emotion, which is anger. Anything else, you're not allowed to be sad. You're certainly, big boys don't cry, do they? So you're not supposed to cry. Vulnerability, no, that's weakness. Even actually joy, to show joy at something, it's real pleasure at something that might be beautiful, that's going to get you mocked and laughed at. And so we're really restricted. And sometimes it means that our ability to express things is limited, but it can also have really terrible circumstances for men's mental health. I mean, sure, probably a lot of people know that the statistics around men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women. It's the number one killer of men between the ages of 19 and 45 in the UK, more than cancer, heart disease, road traffic accidents. It tops the lot. 40% of men in a survey recently said they feel lonely some or all of the time. 20% of men said they got no actual friends. So the patriarchy is a social construct that we've all been brought up in that has very detrimental impacts on men. And maybe I was quite lucky when I grew up. I grew up in a certain generation. You look at the younger generation of men that don't perhaps have the same economic opportunities that I had, that seem to be suffering increasingly when it comes to the education systems we got. So it's almost like a double bind. On the one hand, they are suffering under the patriarchy, but on the other hand, they're often being told that they're problematic and they're toxic. And it's no wonder that we have these divisions. So the patriarchy benefits hardly any people apart from those at the very top in the elite of society that are quite happy to allow us to all to be divided so that they can continue to prosper. But it massively impacts men in a multitude of ways.
And it's interesting. I was listening to the TV earlier and they were doing an interview with, and I'm hoping I'm going to get his name right. I think his name is Stephen Graham. He's the Liverpudlian actor who's a phenomenal actor. But that is literally hitting our TVs this week in the UK. He's written and directed a new TV series, which is all about, he plays the father of a 13-year-old boy that gets arrested for murdering a young girl. And when he was being interviewed, he was like, "Oh, what made you write this?" Because he's written the script and, as I say, directed, and he stars in it. And he said, I kept seeing on the news these incidents where young boys were stabbing their girlfriend or a girl that they liked but they deemed to reject them. And in that moment, I was just thinking about you going, actually, if the only emotion that has deemed kind of acceptable is anger, about the depth of shame and emotion they're feeling in those moments, and their go-to response is anger, which unfortunately is expressed in a way that leads to somebody losing their life. And I think there's so many examples of that we see in the press daily, unfortunately. And often that is women that are suffering, but actually we're overlooking there is suffering going on there, that, the behaviour is completely unacceptable. But as you say, what is the system doing that's creating these responses? And again, you were talking about, actually, there's only few people that are benefiting, and it tends to be kind of a very few kind of those in power. Yeah. And I think we're seeing this playing out in society at the moment. And before we hit record, I was asking you about your take on, particularly in the last few months, we're seeing kind of DE&I initiatives being kind of rolled back. And what was your take on that? And you shared something really powerful, and I would love to hear your perspective on that, and for people to hear what you shared, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's interesting what you said there, because I was speaking to someone last year, again, someone else I met on LinkedIn. Her name's Tracy Sisk, and she's American, and she was talking to me about how effectively what a patriarchy is. It's about power. It's about power structures, and it really made me realize that actually that's how I should be talking about it. It should be about it's about power, and it's about how the power is used. So power can be used really responsibly and to benefit many, many people. It can be misused. And I think what we're seeing in so many parts of the world now is the misuse of power in ways that I never thought I'd be seeing, if I'm honest. So I think what's happening in terms of the DEI space, the DEI backlash, the woke backlash, if you actually think about it, it's crazy, isn't it? What inherently is wrong about diversity? Having different people. I mean, there can't be anything wrong with that. Fairness. How could fairness be wrong? How can including people be something that's wrong? Even woke, which is a term that has been, like DEI, has been weaponized. It just means you're more awake to social injustice. But I think the reason why we're having the backlash is not because those things are inherently bad. It's because the way we've done DEI has been really poor. The way we've executed DEI initiatives, the way we've talked about them, the way we've narrated them, and the way we've implemented them has been really poor. And what I find really bizarre is that very often, even though one of the words in the DEI acronym is inclusion, we've excluded a very large proportion of the population. And very often we're excluding those people that have most of the power. If you think about, when you look at middle-aged white men, well, who generally would you see in positions of power in organizations in society? We probably have a disproportionate amount. You include us from these things, you exclude us from these things, and it's not surprising there's not progress being made. So I think what we're seeing is a backlash as a result of the fact that we haven't done a great job of really implementing DEI initiatives or ideas particularly well, or narrating them. It doesn't mean they're bad. We have to find a better way of doing it. That's really the point. We I say we, I'm talking about us, we as sort of the royal we, but anyone who is involved in those kind of things, we've got to look at what we're doing and do it more effectively.
Brilliant. And I think that is so important. When you said that earlier, I was like, yes, that is it. And obviously that's what Why Lead is all about. So if we look at what you do around inclusive leadership, what is it that you would hope that organisations would do well? It sounds like many aren't. What are you seeing best practice out there, and what are you working with organisations on to help them in this space?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I've given this a lot of thought, and I've obviously in the work I've been doing and over the last sort of 4 years with different organizations, I've learned a lot from doing that. And I've also been able to go back and think about what worked and didn't work in my long corporate career. I think typically what works when organizations do this well, the first two fundamental things is that they have a vision. They have a vision about what they want to create. And it's not something they want to do next year. It might be 3 to 5 years. And there might be some goals around it, but it's not just about the goals. It's not about just how many women we're going to get in senior positions. They have a vision for what they're trying to create as an organization, what they want that to feel like. And they get people, believing in that. They communicate it. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's really crucial, but it's so often missing, is that anything like this, you need to have the genuine, authentic sponsorship and advocacy from the most senior and influential people in the organization. Very often what they'll do is they might write a check, sometimes quite a small one, and they will stand up and say, I'm really behind this. You will never see them again, and just leave it to the HR or DI people to do. It doesn't work that way. They have to go on their own journeys. They have to go to be authentically behind it and really committed. And then I think aligned to that, it's organizations looking at what it's the old Desmond Tutu quote, which I really love, which says we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We've got to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And once you've found out why they're falling in, that's what you tackle. So what we've often done, as a simple example, and one of the things that first got me really interested in this before the kind of the Sarah Everard tragedy and the epiphany I had from that, was that I was always struck by the fact that when it comes to women's initiatives, gender initiatives, which are typically targeted at getting more women in senior positions, we would take a group of women and we would work on them, fix them. Very often, not so much now, but certainly very often it was like, this is how you need to show up in this environment. In other words, how to be perhaps a bit more masculine, a bit more assertive, a bit tougher. And then we just throw them back into the same old environment that they can get the best out of them in the first place. In other words, we're fixing the women who don't really need fixing, but we're not fixing the root causes, what's really creating that situation in the first place. So the outcome of that was that they would either suck it up, might do that for a while, but typically they would leave. Because you've equipped them now with more confidence and self-belief and more knowledge about how to navigate these things. They will take it where it's appreciated. And so I think that's the kind of stuff we need to be doing. We're just looking quite deeply at what is actually going on. What are the systemic issues in society and in our organizations? Recognize you won't fix that with a few initiatives, but have the courage to say, we really want to get here in a reasonable time frame. So, I think, in your introduction, you said it's like another 130 years until we achieve gender equity according to the World Economic Forum. But that's not good enough. That's 5 generations. We are closer to putting someone on Mars than we are to achieving gender equity. So let's pick some nearer term, medium term goals and go for those, but be doing the things that are going to get us towards that rather than just the tokenistic things that most organizations do.
Love that. Love that. And what you've done there is beautifully gone, actually, here's the macro piece, and let's take it down to some micro initiatives. So if there's somebody listening that's either got somebody in their life that thinks might benefit from hearing this message and they're a male in their life, or it is a male that's listening and going, I get this, what is it I can start to do? What would your advice to them be?
First trait that I always do when I talk about allyship, it applies to leadership as well. You could also just say it's good humans do this. It's just to be curious. And if you're curious about something, it means you've got a real desire to find out something about it. So the first thing I think people can do is just go out and educate yourself. Just go and read some books. I've recommended a couple of books already. There's many others I could recommend, but The Authority Gap by Marianne Seacart is amazing. There's so many resources out there. There's podcasts, there's TED Talks, there's books you can read. Just go out and do some education. Go and find out some things. Have the intention of finding out what you've been wrong about. I think it's a really good way of thinking about it. Go and find out something you might be wrong about, but do so without any judgment on yourself. Just think, oh, that's great, because it means tomorrow I'll be less wrong. And then I think once you've done that and you've done some of the work yourself, then feel free to kind of share that with people, but ask questions. I think I learned a lot from reading those books, and that ignited my curiosity. I've learned far more from actually speaking to women and listening to them, avoiding the temptation to man-interrupt them. which we are conditioned to do. So listen to women. And I think once you've done that, you'll start to get to a point where you're more aware of what's going on. You will see perhaps a slightly different reality. And I think then that will put you in a position where you can then start to perhaps take some bolder action. But that's fine. It could take some time. It probably took me a couple of years before I felt I could probably talk a bit about this now. But in the last 2 years, I've learned so much more, and I'll never stop learning about it. That's the thing I'll say. It's just, you can do that on your own. You just go out and start to learn some stuff.
Love that. And it made me think, I was talking to a woman a few months ago, and she was saying that she'd ended up just having a conversation with her husband. And I don't know how they'd ended up having this conversation, but something had sparked it, where she talked about, oh, actually, if I'm in a lift on my own and a man walks in, her experience. And I think it might have been that she was trying to say to her husband, just be aware when you walk into a lift and there might be a woman standing on her own, the impact you might have unintentionally. And it was just such a blind spot. He was like, I don't understand, because it wasn't an experience that was even on his radar. And she said it opened up this need in him to go, oh gosh, I need to be far more curious, because I hadn't even realized that was a thing. But as you were talking, it also made me think that obviously we're saying about men, because male allyship is important, but even as women, being curious about our own internal kind of how we've internalized the patriarchy. And actually, sometimes we're not even aware, like how women are pitted against each other and all of those things that actually it's not, as you say, it's not about men need to do this and women, you've got it all sorted, you're just the victims. Actually, we perpetuate the system as well if we're not careful.
That's such a great point. And again, in fact, something I didn't realize at first until I started to learn more about this. But yeah, I mean, internalized misogyny is a massive thing. But it's because we've all been brought up in the same system. In really simple terms, boys are brought up from a very early age to be assertive, to be confident, to kind of talk about their achievements and just to generally be boys as we understand it. Girls are taught to be agreeable and compliant and sweet and kind and not boastful. So there's not real surprise that this happens. So very often when women see other women that don't fit that mold, that are being assertive or are being a bit tougher, they will be given labels that you'd never label a man with. I sometimes talk about the tightrope that women walk when it goes to progressing in an organization, that you need to be tough and assertive and focus on your career. You don't want to be too assertive, because then you'll be called bossy. And don't be too tough, because you're going to be called a bitch. Now, in 30 years, or maybe you'll be called an uncaring mother because you're too committed to your career. I've been working for over 30 years. I've never heard one man ever called any of those terms. I've rarely heard men called uncaring fathers for their commitment to work. It certainly never happened to me. So it's things like that we can just start to recognize. The example of that, walking into a lift, is a brilliant example. So how on earth could we be aware of that? Because we don't experience it. But once we're aware, we can start to make just adjustments that can help women to feel safer. And so it's the power we have with fairly simple things is huge. We just need to share some of that and get people thinking more differently and becoming more aware of them.
You've shared so much information that I am sure has kind of whet people's appetite to want to follow more about what you do and listen to more of your stuff. I suppose if there was just one thing that you would hope somebody listening to this conversation takes away, what would you want that to be?
I'll probably build on what I was talking about, which is that through most of my life and career, you get rewarded based on your knowledge, and you don't really want to show that you don't have knowledge, because then it makes you look like you're weak or you don't know stuff. But it's really shifted for me in the last sort of 12 months. And I said about, I'm trying every night sleep less stupid. I want to find out that I'm wrong, because it means tomorrow I'll be less wrong. So I guess the message I'll say to people is go out and find things that you're wrong about. On the basis that means you'll be less wrong the next day. But what's not okay is to stay wrong. When you're presented with lots of evidence and lots of knowledge and lots of realities, and you choose to stay wrong, that's not cool. So yeah, just aim each day to be slightly less wrong than the day before.
I love that reframe. So where can people find out more about you and your work? And I'll put all of these links into the show notes.
Fabulous. So I probably need to get a bit more social media savvy. My main place where people can find out about what I do is on LinkedIn. So every Wednesday, I write my post about smashing the patriarchy. I post and repost other things during the week. I comment on other people's posts, but that's the main vehicle I have for just communicating what I'm learning and bringing in a community to share what they know as well. So LinkedIn is one place. People can contact me by email. If anyone's listening to this and wants to know more about, resources they can tap into, if they got things that they're concerned about, I'm more than happy for people to email me, drop me a WhatsApp. So you can put all of those on there.
What's your email, Jeremy?
It's jeremy@ylead.co.uk.
And Y is the letter Y, isn't it, rather than the word Y?
Yeah. It is, yeah. So I'm really happy to get people to do that, because actually what I want to do, I want to bring more people into a community where we're trying to affect change that benefits all of us. So really, it's the more the merrier. So I would love to hear from other people on the back of this.
Brilliant. Well, firstly, thank you for the work that you're doing in the world, Jeremy. It's you're using your voice, your platform, your experience for such good. So thank you, and thank you for giving your time today to this conversation.
It's been a pleasure, Nikki. Thanks for having me on.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, I'd love for you to share it on social media or with the amazing women in your life. I'd also love to connect with you, so head over to luminate-group.co.uk where you'll find ways to stay in touch. And if this episode resonated with you, one of the best ways to support the show is by subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. Your review helps other women discover this resource, so together we can lift each other up as we rise. So thanks for listening. Until next time, take care.